Have you ever wondered how a child can reveal the deepest secret of a millionaire? Get ready to be surprised. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Felipe Andrade woke up to the soft morning sunlight filtering through the silk curtains of his bedroom. The clock beside the bed showed 6 in the morning, but he didn't feel the usual energy that drove him to get up every morning. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he rubbed his eyes, trying to push away the feeling of emptiness that seemed to have taken over his life. There, in that immense mansion, surrounded by luxuries most people would dream of having, Felipe felt lonelier than ever. He sighed, slowly getting up. He had grown accustomed to this routine of silent mornings, of days filled with commitments that seemed increasingly meaningless. His steps echoed through the empty corridors of the mansion as he descended the stairs, heading towards the living room. The marble floor shone beneath his feet, but the shine couldn't warm his heart. On the glass table near the fireplace, a pile of unopened letters awaited him. Among them, invitations to events he would probably not attend. In the kitchen, Felipe prepared a black coffee and took a sip while looking out the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to illuminate the vast garden. But even with all that natural beauty at his disposal, he couldn't help feeling that something was missing. There was a void that neither the greatest professional successes nor luxury cars could fill. He left the cup in the sink and went to the closet where he kept his workout clothes. He put on a t-shirt, shorts, and the latest running shoes he had bought the week before, but which, until that moment, remained untouched. Running through the tree-lined streets of La Floresta used to be his refuge, a moment to clear his mind and relieve stress. But lately, even that seemed like a futile effort. Felipe left the house and started running towards the park that surrounded the neighborhood. The fresh morning air touched his skin, bringing a brief sense of relief, but his mind continued to wander through disconnected thoughts. As his feet carried him along familiar paths, he reflected on how his life had come to this point. He had everything money could buy: a successful career, a luxurious mansion, sports cars. But deep down, he knew something essential was missing. What had happened to his youthful dreams? When had he traded the pursuit of happiness for the relentless pursuit of success? Those questions accompanied him with each step, making the weight of his existence increasingly unbearable. It was then that something unexpected happened. As he ran down a narrower street, where the trees formed a natural arch above his head, he heard a voice. At first he thought it was a product of his imagination, but then the voice sounded again, this time clearer. "I know you. Your photo is in my dad's wallet." Felipe stopped abruptly, his heart racing not just from the run, but also from surprise. He looked around, trying to locate the source of the voice, and that's when he saw her. Before him stood a girl of about 7 years old. She had brown hair tied in 2 braids that swayed slightly with the morning breeze. Her large, expressive eyes observed him with an almost disconcerting curiosity. Dressed in a simple t-shirt and a pair of worn jeans, she seemed to belong to a completely different world from the one Felipe lived in. He blinked a few times, trying to process what he had just heard. "What did you say?" he asked, bending down to be at the girl's height. "I know you," she repeated with a shy smile. "Your photo is in my dad's wallet?" The phrase echoed in his mind like a riddle, mixing surprise and confusion. "Yes," the girl responded with surprising firmness for someone her age. "My dad has a photo of you in his wallet." Felipe felt a shiver run down his spine. Who could this girl's father be, and why would he have a photo of him? Trying to stay calm, he took a deep breath and moved a little closer to the girl, observing her young and innocent face. She seemed so at ease, as if she had known him for years, although he had never seen this child before. "And what's your father like, Clara?" he asked in a soft voice, still trying to understand what was happening. "He's very nice," Clara answered with the typical simplicity of children. "He's at home now. Do you want to go there? I can show you." Felipe hesitated. Something inside him said not to follow an unknown child, but curiosity, mixed with the growing feeling that this encounter was not by chance, pushed him to accept the invitation. "Okay, Clara," he finally said. "Show me the way." The girl smiled and, without thinking twice, took Felipe's hand, guiding him through the neighborhood streets. As they walked, he couldn't help but notice how the surrounding landscape began to change. The imposing mansions and luxurious houses, so characteristic of La Floresta, gradually gave way to more modest constructions. They left the exclusive neighborhood and entered an area where the houses were simpler and the streets less well-maintained. Felipe looked around, absorbing every detail. It wasn't the kind of place he was used to walking, but there was a kind of beauty in the simplicity of those houses. People seemed to live more authentic lives there, without the masks of luxury he knew so well. Clara continued to walk with determination, occasionally greeting a passing neighbor. Felipe realized that for her, this was a familiar and welcoming environment. Finally, they arrived at a set of simple but well-maintained houses. Clara stopped in front of a worn wooden door and knocked firmly. Felipe held his breath, feeling his heart race. He didn't know what to expect, but something inside him said that this moment would change his life in ways he still couldn't understand. The door opened slowly, revealing a thin man with a tired appearance and unshaven beard. The man looked at Clara and then at Felipe, and in an instant, the eyes of the two men met. Felipe felt as if time had stopped. He knew that face. "Lucas," he murmured, almost breathless. The man before him, his younger brother, smiled slightly, but his eyes were filled with tears. "Yes, Felipe," he answered, his voice trembling with emotion. "It's me." Felipe was paralyzed for a moment, unable to process what was happening. He and Lucas hadn't seen each other in almost 10 years. The last time they spoke, things didn't end well. There were so many unspoken words, so many unresolved hurts. And now, there they were, face to face, with a decade of distance and silence between them. Lucas opened the door wider, gesturing for Felipe to enter. "Come in, please," he said softly. Felipe, still stunned, took a hesitant step inside the house. The interior was simple but cozy. The walls were decorated with family photos, and the aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. The house was small, very different from the mansion where Felipe lived, but there was a sense of warmth and familiarity that he hadn't felt in a long time. Lucas guided him to the living room, where a wooden table was covered with papers and some of Clara's toys. "Sorry for the mess," Lucas said, trying to smile. "With a child at home, things are never completely organized." Felipe just nodded, still processing everything. He sat down on the sofa, which seemed to have seen better days but was comfortable. Lucas went to the kitchen and came back with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Felipe and sat down in the armchair across from him. For a moment, the two brothers sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It was strange, Felipe thought, how time and distance could create such a huge gap between people who were once so close. He and Lucas used to be inseparable in their youth. They had dreams and plans and promised never to lose touch with each other. But somehow life had separated them. Lucas was the first to break the silence. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said, looking at the coffee cup in his hands. "I always imagined that if we met again, it would be in a different way. More formal, perhaps." Felipe gave a small smile. "Yes, I did too. I never thought it would be like this, so unexpected." Lucas let out a humorless laugh. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Felipe nodded, looking at the coffee in his cup. There was so much he wanted to say, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. He looked at his brother, seeing the lines of fatigue on his face, the pain he carried in his eyes. And at that moment, he realized that it didn't matter what had happened in the past. What mattered was the present, the opportunity to rebuild what had been broken. "I'm sorry, Lucas," he finally said, his voice laden with emotion. "I'm sorry for not being here, for letting things get to this point." Lucas looked at him for a long moment, and then sighed. "I'm sorry too, Felipe, but we're here now. And maybe, just maybe, we can start over." And so, in that small living room, surrounded by photos of a life Felipe didn't know, the two brothers began the healing process. It was just the beginning of a long journey, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, Felipe felt a spark of hope. Felipe felt relief upon hearing those words from Lucas, as if a huge stone had been removed from his shoulders. He hadn't realized how much he carried the weight of his absence in his brother's life, and now, looking at Lucas, he saw not only the lines of fatigue, but also the reflection of the man he once knew so well. They had been through so much, and even though time had left its marks, the connection was still there, waiting to be revived. As the comfortable silence settled between them, Clara entered the room with a radiant smile, breaking any tension that still remained. "Dad, Uncle Felipe, look what I made," she exclaimed, holding a colorful drawing in her small hands. The image showed three figures: a tall man, a girl, and another shorter man. "This is us," she explained cheerfully. "You, me, and Uncle Felipe." Lucas smiled, taking the drawing and looking at it carefully. "It's beautiful, honey," he said, pulling Clara close and hugging her. "You're very talented." Felipe, in turn, kept looking at the simplicity of the drawing. It was just a sketch made by a child, but it carried an emotional load that he couldn't describe. That small piece of paper seemed to represent much more than a simple illustration. It was a promise, a sign that he could still be part of that family if he was willing to try. Clara, satisfied with her father's and uncle's approval, ran to another corner of the room to continue playing, leaving the two brothers alone again. Felipe watched his niece as she played with her dolls, immersed in her own world. She seemed so happy and carefree, oblivious to the complexity of the situation between the two adults. Lucas broke the silence once more, looking at his brother with a serious but gentle expression. "You know, Felipe, there were many times when I thought about reaching out to you. I wanted to call you so many times, but I always wondered if it would be worth it. I didn't know if you still cared. After Helena's death, everything became confusing. I was trying to stay strong for Clara, but it wasn't easy." Felipe felt the weight of Lucas's words. He wasn't present during the most difficult moment of his brother's life, and now, more than ever, he felt guilt consuming him. But there was also a desire to fix things, to be part of Lucas and Clara's life in a meaningful way. "I wish I had been there for you, Lucas," he replied, his voice almost a whisper. I didn't know. I got so involved in work, in my own ambitions, that I left family aside. But it's not too late, is it? We can try to rebuild this." Lucas was silent for a few seconds, reflecting on his brother's words. "It's not too late," he finally said, with a slight smile. "But it will take time. We can't just erase everything that happened." Felipe nodded, understanding the truth in Lucas's words. The path to reconciliation would be long, and it wouldn't be easy. But he was willing to move forward, step by step, without rushing. The important thing was that both were willing to try. After a while, Lucas got up and went to the kitchen again. He came back with more coffee, and the two began to talk about everyday subjects, trying to make up for lost time. There was no rush to resolve all the issues of the past at once. Both knew that patience was needed, and each word exchanged was a small step towards rebuilding their relationship. Felipe looked around the room, noticing the signs of the modest life Lucas led. The house was simple, with worn furniture, but every corner seemed to be filled with love. Photos of Clara at different stages of her life were scattered on the walls, along with images of Lucas and Helena in happier times. He felt a pang of sadness as he realized how much he had missed by distancing himself from his brother. He hadn't been there to see Clara grow up, hadn't known about Helena's death, and now he had to deal with the consequences of his absence. "Lucas," Felipe began hesitantly, "I know I can't change the past, but I want to help in any way I can. I'm not just talking about money, although I know I can offer that. I want to be present in your lives, truly." Lucas looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise and caution. "We don't need your money, Felipe," he said calmly. "What Clara and I need is you here, with us. I know your life is different now, that you have important responsibilities. But if you really want to be part of our life, what matters most is the time you can dedicate to us." These words hit Felipe like a gentle but firm blow. It was true. He had always believed that his wealth could solve any problem, that offering money and financial security was enough to fix everything. But at that moment, he understood that what Lucas and Clara needed wasn't more financial resources. They needed his presence, his dedication, his time. Felipe smiled, feeling a lightness in his heart that he hadn't experienced in a long time. I'll do my best, Lucas. I want to be here. As much as I can. I promise. Lucas returned the smile, and for the first time since they had reunited, Felipe felt that the chasm between them was beginning to diminish. It wouldn't be easy to rebuild the relationship, but he was willing to try, and Lucas seemed willing to give him that chance. The rest of that morning was peaceful. The two brothers continued talking, sometimes about trivial things, other times touching on memories that had been buried for a long time. Clara, in turn, came and went from the room, showing her drawings, asking questions, always full of energy and joy. And for a few hours, Felipe could feel as if the loneliness that had haunted him for so long was finally beginning to dissipate. When the sun began to move towards the horizon, casting a golden light through the windows, Felipe knew it was time to go. He got up, promising he would return soon. Lucas accompanied him to the door, and before leaving, Felipe looked at his brother one last time. "Thank you for letting me back into your life," he said sincerely. "It means a lot to me." Lucas nodded, touching Felipe's shoulder with a brotherly gesture. "I'm happy you're back too, Felipe. Let's take it one step at a time." With these words, Felipe went out into the street, where the afternoon air was cooler and the sky was beginning to tinge with pinkish hues. As he moved away from Lucas's house, he looked back one last time, seeing his brother standing at the door watching him leave. There was a sense of hope in the air, and Felipe felt that, despite everything, something was finally changing in his life. Felipe walked back home with slow steps, taking the time to reflect on the day he had just lived. The encounter with Lucas and Clara had deeply affected him. For the first time in many years, he felt that something beyond work truly mattered in his life. That constant weight, that emptiness that tormented him, seemed lighter now, as if the simple act of reconnecting with his brother had begun to fill a space within him that he didn't even know was so empty. As he walked through the streets back to the La Floresta neighborhood, where his mansion was located, he noticed something he had never perceived before. The streets, the houses, and even the trees seemed different. It was as if, after reuniting with Lucas, the world around him had gained a new perspective. It wasn't just luxury and status that mattered. There was something deeper, more meaningful. When he arrived home, Felipe opened the heavy wooden door and entered the entrance hall. The silence inside the mansion was palpable. He closed the door behind him and stood still for a moment, just listening to the muffled sound of his own breathing. He looked around, observing the luxurious environment that he once considered his sanctuary. Now, all of that seemed cold, empty, and lifeless. He walked to the living room and sat down in one of the soft leather armchairs. There was an old photo album stored in one of the drawers of the center table. It was one of those items he rarely picked up, but always knew was there, like a reminder of times past. Moved by an impulse, he opened the drawer and took out the album. His hands hesitated for a moment before opening the cover. The first pages were full of photos from his childhood, happy moments he had shared with Lucas and their parents. They had always been a close-knit family, and the photos captured the essence of a time when everything seemed simpler. There were images of them playing in the backyard, smiling at the camera during vacations, and even photos of the two brothers venturing on trails during family trips. It was impossible not to feel a pang of nostalgia and regret while flipping through those pages. Felipe stopped at one particular photo. He and Lucas were in the middle of an improvised soccer field, with their arms around each other and huge smiles on their faces. They were inseparable at that time, always making plans for the future, always promising to be there for each other. He ran his finger over the image, remembering how he felt that day, full of dreams and expectations. The inevitable question came to his mind. At what point did we lose each other? He closed the album and put it back in the drawer. He felt a lump in his throat, but took a deep breath, pushing away the tears that threatened to emerge. He couldn't change the past, but, as Lucas had said, they could start over. And that's what he was determined to do. In the days that followed, Felipe made sure to keep in touch with Lucas. They began to see each other more frequently, and Felipe found himself increasingly anxious for these visits. He loved spending time with Clara, listening to her stories, and observing how she lit up any environment with her cheerful presence. The girl's energy seemed to have the power to break any remaining tension between him and Lucas, making their interactions more natural and relaxed. One Saturday, while having coffee together at a simple restaurant near Lucas's house, Felipe couldn't help but notice how his brother seemed more relaxed, more at ease than in the first times they had reunited. They laughed at old jokes, talked about soccer, one of both of their favorite topics when they were younger, and even made plans to watch a match together. "Do you still play soccer sometimes?" Felipe asked, curious to know if Lucas maintained any of his old passions. Lucas smiled, taking a sip of his coffee before answering. "Sometimes, yes. Clara and I play in the park on weekends. It's not the same as before, of course, but it's still fun." Felipe laughed, remembering how they used to compete fiercely when they played together. "You were always better than me," he admitted, shaking his head with a nostalgic smile. "I don't think I ever managed to beat you in a fair match." "That's because you never stopped trying to tackle me," Lucas replied, laughing. "But yes, we were a good duo, weren't we?" "Yes, we were," Felipe agreed, feeling a warmth in his chest as he remembered those times. "I miss that, you know?" Lucas nodded, his eyes softening. "I do too, Felipe. But as you said, we can start over." From that day on, things really started to change for Felipe. He began to slowly distance himself from the exhausting work that consumed so much of his life. For the first time in years, he started to delegate more responsibilities in the company, allowing himself to have more free time to focus on what really mattered. The weekends, which were previously filled with business commitments and social events, became reserved for visits to Lucas and Clara. It was during one of these visits that an idea came to Felipe's mind. They were walking through the park after a quiet lunch, and Clara was running ahead, playing and laughing as always. Lucas was walking beside Felipe, and the two were talking about the little things in life. It was then that Felipe noticed the old community center at the end of the street. The building was in terrible condition, with faded paint and broken windows. It looked abandoned. "Do you remember the community center?" Lucas asked, pointing to the building. "It used to be the heart of the community when we were younger. There were activities for children, classes for adults, and events for everyone. But in recent years, it's been getting more and more abandoned. Now they can barely keep the doors open." Felipe looked at the building carefully. Something inside him began to awaken. He had always been good at business, at making things happen. Maybe this was an opportunity to use his skills for something more meaningful than just generating profit. Maybe he could make a difference there, help restore the community center, and somehow give back to the community that had been so important in his youth. "I think we can do something about this," Felipe said, with a smile forming on his lips. "I have some contacts who could help, and I'd love to get personally involved." Lucas looked at him surprised, but soon smiled. "Are you serious?" "Yes, I am," Felipe replied firmly. "Let's make this happen. We can bring the center back to life." And so, at that moment, a new purpose was born for Felipe. It was no longer just about rebuilding his relationship with Lucas and Clara, but also about helping to revitalize the community around them. He was ready to use his resources and skills for something bigger, something that really mattered. Felipe was determined to turn that idea into reality. That same week, he began making calls, activating his contacts in the business and philanthropy world. He not only wanted to restore the community center, he wanted that space to once again be a place where people could gather, learn, and grow together, as it had been during his youth. There was a sense of urgency in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in years, he was truly excited about a project that didn't involve profits or prestige. Lucas, although skeptical at first, ended up getting more and more involved in the project. Deep down, he had always been a man of action, someone who liked to work with his hands and see the fruits of his effort. He knew the community needed that center. Many of the local residents had good memories of when the space was active, and Lucas knew that if they could restore it, it could transform many people's lives. The two brothers began to plan the work. Felipe would take care of all the financial part and negotiations with companies, while Lucas, with his practical knowledge and connection to the community, would coordinate the volunteer teams and supervise the renovations. It was a partnership that brought them even closer, like in the old days when they worked together to accomplish small childhood missions, such as building playhouses or exploring unknown trails. Now the project was bigger, but the spirit of collaboration was the same. In the following weeks, progress was slow but steady. Felipe managed to secure substantial donations from local companies and even some of his more influential contacts. He was surprised to realize that many people were willing to help, not just with money but also with time and resources. It seemed that the project touched something inside them, a willingness to contribute to something greater than themselves. The community center wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of hope for the community. Meanwhile, Lucas led the volunteer teams. He organized the renovation efforts, coordinated the cleaning of the grounds, and helped remove debris. Sometimes Clara accompanied them, and, although she was young, she loved feeling part of something so important. With her lively way, she had become a kind of mascot for the project, always running from one side to the other, bringing water to the workers or helping to organize materials. Felipe also got directly involved in the physical work, something he hadn't done in a long time. He discovered that there was something incredibly satisfying about picking up a brush and helping to paint the worn walls of the center. It was hard, sweaty work, but he felt a deep connection with what he was doing. It was different from anything he had experienced in business. At the end of the day, he felt exhausted, but filled with a sense of accomplishment that no money could buy. Over the course of months, the community center began to take shape. The walls, once dirty and faded, were now covered with a new layer of bright paint. New windows were installed and the roof was completely renovated. Equipment donations began to arrive, including new furniture, teaching materials, and even computers. The place was being reborn, and everyone could feel the difference. On a Saturday afternoon, Felipe paused for a moment to admire the progress. He was sweaty, with paint stains on his hands and arms, but the smile on his face was undeniable. He looked around and saw Lucas helping a group of volunteers set up a new playground for the children. Clara was beside them, playing with other children who lived in the neighborhood. There was laughter and animated conversations in the air, and for the first time in a long time, Felipe felt that he was exactly where he should be. Lucas approached, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a paint-stained cloth. "It's looking good, isn't it?" he said with a smile of satisfaction. "It is," Felipe replied, looking around. "I'm proud of what we've accomplished so far." Lucas nodded, his eyes shining with a mixture of fatigue and accomplishment. "I am too. I don't know if I've told you this, but I'm happy you're here, Felipe. Not just because of the center, but because you're back in my life." Felipe felt a lump in his throat upon hearing those words. He knew how much this meant, and he also knew he had much to thank his brother for. "I'm happy too, Lucas. I feel like I'm finally doing something that really matters." The two brothers stood in silence for a moment, just observing the movement around them. The community center was coming to life, as was the relationship between them. It was as if, by rebuilding that physical space, they were also rebuilding the bonds that had been broken over the years. Each painted wall, each piece of furniture installed, each new activity organized, was a symbol of reconciliation and renewal. When the official reopening of the community center finally arrived, it was a day of celebration. The entire neighborhood seemed to have come out of their homes to participate. There was food, music, and lots of laughter. Children ran from one side to the other in the new playground, while adults explored the new facilities, marveling at the transformation. For many, the center was a reminder of simpler times, and seeing it restored brought a sense of renewed hope. Felipe and Lucas stood side by side, observing the movement. Renata, the director of the community center, went up to the improvised stage and took the microphone to give a brief thank you speech. Her eyes were misty as she spoke about the importance of the center to the community and how it had been resurrected thanks to the collective effort of everyone present there. When Renata finished her speech, the audience applauded warmly, and then she gestured for Felipe to come up to the stage. He hesitated for a moment, not being used to receiving this kind of recognition outside the corporate environment. But Lucas encouraged him with a nod, and Felipe climbed the stairs to the stage, feeling the energy of the crowd around him. Taking the microphone, he looked at all those people, familiar and unfamiliar faces, people who had somehow been touched by the work he and Lucas had done. "I'm not here as the benefactor of this project," he began, his voice resonating through the microphone. I'm here as part of this community. This center is not just about what my brother and I did. It's a testimony to what we can achieve together when we work as a team and when we care about each other." He paused, looking at Lucas, who was in the front row, smiling at him. "This project has taught me more than anything I've ever done in my life. It taught me the true value of community, collective effort, and most importantly, family love. I'm proud to be part of this, and I'm grateful that all of you are here, contributing to the rebirth of this place." When he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Felipe handed the microphone back to Renata and stepped down from the stage, feeling a wave of emotions he couldn't describe. He knew that this was just the beginning of a new phase in his life, a phase he was eager to explore, alongside his family and his community. The community center was back, stronger than ever, and with it, Felipe's life had transformed for the better. After the reopening event, Felipe walked through the community center, observing people interacting and feeling more connected to the place than he ever imagined. He had spent most of his life focused on numbers, results, and the growth of his company, but now, seeing children playing, the elderly chatting, and families gathered, he realized that the true value of his existence was there, in helping to build something that improved people's lives. He approached a group of children who were having fun in the new playground. Clara was among them, leading the game with her usual energy and contagious smile. Seeing her uncle approach, she ran towards him and hugged him tightly. "Uncle Felipe, did you see how beautiful the center is? I love playing here now," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. Felipe smiled and bent down to be at her height. "I saw, Clara, and you helped a lot to make all this possible. I'm very proud of you." She smiled even more, clearly happy with the recognition. "I'm proud of you too, Uncle. You're the best." Clara gave a small kiss on his cheek before running back to play with her friends. As he watched Clara run through the playground, Felipe felt a wave of emotions. That girl, with her joy and innocence, had helped him rediscover what really mattered in life, and for that, he was eternally grateful. He turned and saw Lucas talking to Renata, the director of the community center, who had been a key player in the revitalization process. They seemed to be in a serious conversation, but there was a sparkle in both their eyes, a sign that they were happy with what they had achieved together. Felipe felt a twinge of curiosity seeing the closeness between his brother and Renata. They seemed to have become good friends over the months of work at the center, and it made him think about how those bonds had been strengthened. When Lucas finished the conversation and approached Felipe, the latter couldn't help but smile. "You and Renata seem to be getting along very well," he commented, with a playful tone. Lucas shrugged, but couldn't hide the smile that formed on his lips. "She's an incredible woman. Without her, none of this would have been possible. She's a natural leader, knows exactly what the community needs, and how to help people." Felipe nodded. "I noticed. She has a special way of handling everything, and if I'm not mistaken, I think you have a special fondness for her." Lucas laughed softly, shaking his head. "Maybe," he admitted, not denying it. "But we're just getting to know each other better. It's still early for anything beyond that." Felipe put his hand on his brother's shoulder and smiled. "Whatever it is, I'm happy for you. You deserve to find someone who makes you feel good." The two stood in silence for a moment, observing the movement around them. Renata, in turn, was now talking to a group of elderly people, listening attentively to their suggestions about new programs that could be implemented at the center. She radiated confidence and empathy, qualities that Felipe deeply admired. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the community center, Felipe felt a sense of peace that he hadn't experienced in a long time. Everything seemed to be in the right place, and he knew that this new phase of his life was just beginning. In the months that followed, the community center flourished in an impressive way. Thanks to Felipe's resources and continued support, as well as Lucas and Renata's dedicated leadership, new activities and programs were added, attracting more and more community residents. There were computer classes for adults, artistic activities for children, health and wellness programs, and even cultural events that brought together people of all ages. Felipe was more involved than ever, He found a balance between his work at the company and the time dedicated to the center. Sometimes he spent mornings in business meetings and in the afternoon was at the center, painting a room or helping to organize an event. The exhausting routine that once consumed him was now filled with purpose, and he felt renewed, physically and emotionally. Lucas, in turn, had become a central figure in the community. He was responsible for coordinating the center's infrastructure projects, ensuring that everything was working perfectly. The manual work and interaction with volunteers brought him a satisfaction he hadn't experienced since the days he worked as an engineer, before his life fell apart with his gambling addiction. The rebirth of the community center was, for him, a metaphor for the rebirth of his own life. Renata was also closer to both of them, especially Lucas. They began to spend more time together outside the center, and it wasn't long before rumors about a possible romance between them began to circulate in the community. However, Lucas and Renata kept things discreet, focusing on their work and responsibilities. Felipe, observing from the outside, couldn't help but feel a hint of satisfaction. He had rediscovered his connection with family and community, and seeing his brother finding happiness also filled him with joy. He knew the journey wasn't complete yet. There was still much work to be done, both at the center and in their own lives, but he felt they were on the right path. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, while the three were gathered at the center for a meeting about upcoming events, Lucas finally touched on the subject that everyone seemed to avoid. "Renata and we're thinking about going out to dinner tonight. Just the two of us," he said, looking at Felipe with a mixture of anxiety and expectation. Felipe smiled, feeling proud of his brother. "I think it's a great idea, Lucas. You two deserve some time together, away from here. Go, have fun. I'll take care of everything here if you need." Renata, who was standing next to Lucas, gave a shy smile. "Thank you, Felipe. I think it will be good for both of us. And who knows, it might be the beginning of something new." Felipe nodded, feeling the warmth of true friendship and family support. He realized at that moment that his life had taken an unexpected but absolutely necessary turn. The community center wasn't just a project. It was the center of his new life, the place where he had found his true purpose, alongside his family, and a community that somehow completed him. As Lucas and Renata prepared to leave that night, Felipe stayed behind at the community center, looking at the lights that illuminated the now renovated place. He knew that his journey of transformation was just beginning, and although the future was still uncertain, he was eager to discover what else life had in store for him. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face whatever came, with an open heart full of hope.